Darren Targaryen. He's a claimant.
You may not rule and remain yourself. There is in you a door that must shut. You will do things that your heart would have recoiled from. I dispute that I must become what I am not. Time will tell.
Rhaenyra just sat on the Iron Throne, and within hours, everyone around her already wants her gone. The nobles hate her, the small folk are starving, her own allies are turning against each other, and there's a fake prince walking around Old Town pretending to be someone he's not. This episode is called Rhaenyra Triumphant, but nothing about it feels like a win. By the end, you'll understand why this queen might be more alone than any ruler in Westeros history. The episode opens with a tense standoff outside King's Landing. Daemon rides out with his newly bonded dragon riders to meet Ormond Hightower and his men, hoping to end things without more bloodshed. They ask the Hightower forces to bend the knee and hand over a boy they claim is Daemon Targaryen, a prince with a real claim to the throne. Standing beside Ormond is a hardened warrior wielding an ancestral Valyrian steel sword called Orphan Maker, a name that tells you everything about the kind of battles this blade has seen. Ormond himself carries his own Valyrian sword, passed down through his house for generations. For a moment, it looks like every single person in this meeting is armed with a weapon forged from dragonfire and old magic, which makes the tension even heavier because any one of these blades could end a life in seconds. Rhaenyra offers mercy, bend the knee, and you get to walk away. Daemon isn't thrilled about this decision. He wants blood. He reminds everyone that these are the same people responsible for killing his kin, and he doesn't hide his disappointment when Ormond actually agrees to kneel. He even makes a private promise to reward one of his own men with a castle and a noble title, a small detail that will matter more later, because that promise was made without anyone else's knowledge, and secrets like that tend to explode when they come out. But here's where things get suspicious. Ormond's surrender doesn't feel real. It feels like a stall tactic, buying time so his people can disappear with the dragon riders still standing right there. And it's not just paranoia. In the background, a boy sits on top of a dragon that shouldn't accept just anyone as a rider. Dragons are famously loyal to one bonded rider, and letting a stranger climb onto their back usually ends in that stranger becoming a meal. So the fact that this boy is calmly sitting there raises a huge red flag. Something isn't right about this Darren. The story then rewinds slightly to explain who this missing prince actually is. He's the youngest son of the former king, sent away to be raised far from the capital when he was still a baby. His own mother made that choice because she felt she'd already failed with her other children, and she didn't want her youngest to be shaped by all the chaos and politics of the royal court. It was meant to protect him. Instead, the boy grew up completely isolated from his family, to the point where nobody in King's Landing would even recognize his face if he stood right in front of them. And that detail becomes incredibly important, because it means an imposter could easily slip into his identity without anyone noticing right away. Back in the throne room, Rhaenyra is dealing with a mountain of problems that have nothing to do with imposters or dragons. She's furious that critical decisions were made without her, decisions that backfired badly, and left her holding the consequences. The people around her keep pointing out that these choices weren't hers. They were made by men acting on her behalf, without her permission. It's a pattern that keeps repeating. She takes the blame for outcomes she never actually chose, while the men around her walk away from responsibility. And it's slowly starting to eat at her. There's also a quieter, more haunting layer building underneath all of this political drama. Rhaenyra is not sleeping. She hasn't slept properly in a long time, and it's starting to show. She stares blankly into space during conversations. Sounds start fading in and out around her, replaced by a low, distant rumbling in her ears. It happens more than once in this episode, and each time it does, something shifts in her expression, like she's slipping somewhere else entirely, somewhere darker, If this reminds you of another Targaryen queen who slowly lost her grip on reality before making a devastating decision, that's not a coincidence. The show seems to be building a very deliberate parallel, right down to the specific sound of bells ringing whenever she starts drifting. It doesn't confirm anything about where her story is headed, but it plants a seed of dread that's impossible to ignore. Every time those bells ring, you're left wondering just how far this queen is willing to go before she breaks completely, and whether the people around her will even notice before it's too late. She also has to deal with something painfully human in the middle of all this chaos. The room she's supposed to rule from used to belong to her father. She can't sleep in his old bed. She can't shake the feeling of being surrounded by ghosts, memories of the people she's lost, people she'll never get to speak to again. So instead of facing that alone, she turns to Demon for comfort, seeking some kind of stability in a place that constantly reminds her of grief. Meanwhile, plans for her official coronation hit a wall almost immediately. Getting formally recognized as ruler requires public ceremonies, processions, and blessings from the faith, all the traditional signs that prove a monarch is legitimate. Without them, many people across the realm won't fully accept her as queen, no matter what title she holds. And when she tries to arrange all of this, she runs straight into resistance from the one person whose approval she desperately needs to make it official. Then comes a discovery that makes everything worse. The crown's treasury, the gold needed to fund a coronation and keep the kingdom running, has vanished. It was deliberately split apart and hidden in 3 separate locations by the previous administration. And the only people who knew where all 3 pieces were hidden are now dead or unreachable. Without that gold, there's no coronation, no grand ceremony, nothing to convince the realm that this queen is truly in control. And on top of that, ordinary people are already going hungry because of a blockade she personally ordered months ago, a decision that was meant to weaken her enemies, but is now starving her own people instead. Word starts spreading that Triarchy raiders are still roaming free across the realm, seizing hostages wherever they go. It sounds like a minor detail buried in a longer conversation, but it's the kind of loose thread that tends to come back and cause real damage later, so it's worth keeping in the back of your mind. Meanwhile, Rhaenyra makes a sharp guess about who might actually be holding on to her missing gold, and decides to demand tribute from every major house in the realm. It's a bold move, but it comes with a cost. Powerful families don't like being told what to hand over, and forcing their hand this early in her reign risks turning allies into enemies before she's even had time to prove herself. She dismisses her old council and starts building a new one from scratch, pulling loyal faces into key positions. But even as she reorganizes her inner circle, bigger threats are looming just out of reach. One of the most dangerous riders from the previous battles has vanished along with his dragon, and nobody in the room can say for certain where he's gone. That uncertainty hangs over every conversation like a blade waiting to drop. She also makes it clear she wants a rogue dragon and its rider captured, a demand that quietly sets up tension with someone she trusts, someone connected to that very rider in ways she doesn't fully realize yet. As she moves through the castle, she keeps running into a growing infestation of rats, an image the show uses again and again until it eventually sparks an idea in her mind, one that will define the rest of the episode. She meets separately with 2 women, held under careful watch inside the keep, hoping one of them might know where the missing treasury went. There's a strange twist here, because one of them clearly does know the answer, but says nothing, and it's left ambiguous whether that silence is deliberate deception or simple carelessness. What is clear is how desperately Rhaenyra craves validation from her, some kind of acknowledgement that she's a good and capable ruler, approval that never comes. A tense meeting with the head of the faith reveals the real obstacle standing between her and formal recognition as queen. Without physical proof that the previous king is dead, the faith refuses to publicly bless her rule. creating an uncomfortable and almost darkly funny situation because the audience already knows that former king is very much alive and slowly making his way back toward the capital. She argues that her rule is divinely ordained, framing her claim to the throne as part of a much larger prophecy. But the faith isn't interested in prophecy. They want proof, and proof is the one thing she cannot give them. Later, an uncomfortable dinner unfolds with one of her closest allies, a conversation that starts friendly but slowly turns tense as the topic of illegitimate children comes up, a subject she desperately wants to avoid, given her own family's history. The tension in that room builds quietly at first, but by the end of the meal, something has fundamentally shifted between them, and not for the better. Throughout all of this, she keeps slipping into those same disturbing episodes of detachment, staring blankly, while distant sounds fade in and out. Each time it happens, it feels a little longer, a little harder to pull her back from. And each time, you're reminded of that other queen whose descent into madness ended in fire and devastation. Whether this show is heading toward the same kind of ending, or simply borrowing the imagery to build dread, is still unclear, but the pattern is impossible to unsee once you notice it. Getting dressed for her first day on the throne, one of her most loyal companions gently warns her that displaying a fallen loved one's sword might send the wrong message to the people watching. It's a small moment, but it says a lot about how carefully every visual choice a monarch makes gets scrutinized by the public. Sitting the throne itself brings its own complications, subtle physical ones that echo an old piece of folklore about the throne rejecting unworthy rulers, though the show never confirms whether that folklore is literally true or just superstition passed down through generations. As she listens to petition after petition from desperate citizens, a pattern emerges. Almost every problem being brought to her was, in some way, caused by decisions she herself made. The blockade she ordered, the extra dragons she brought into a city that can't feed them. It becomes painfully clear that she is now cleaning up messes of her own making, while still trying to look like a strong and decisive leader in front of everyone watching. That growing tension over food and resources eventually boils over into the episode's most talked about sequence, a banquet where she serves the wealthy nobles of the city something they never expected, using the very rats that have been swarming the castle as a symbol of her frustration with their hoarding while ordinary people starve. It's shocking, uncomfortable, and undeniably clever, a move that earns her both fear and quiet respect from the people forced to sit through it. A private, almost poetic exchange between her and Demon reveals just how far his ambitions stretch. Talk of conquering lands far beyond anything they currently control. Dreams that sound eerily similar to the downfall of another power-hungry ruler from this universe's history. She reminds him of an old warning about dragons never being fully tamed, and about an ancient civilization that fell after reaching for too much power. A warning that feels less like nostalgia and more like foreshadowing. By the final act, alliances that once felt solid are visibly cracking. A furious argument over succession and legitimacy plays out loudly enough for half the castle staff to overhear, turning a private disagreement into public gossip that will be impossible to walk back. And the fake identity introduced at the start of the episode finally unravels, revealing a deception that puts an entire city's worth of hostages at risk. Hostages she now cannot simply burn away, no matter how much some part of her might want to.